Did it first. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 7 p.m. For the audience here tonight, the City of Glendora utilizes a hybrid meeting format to allow for participation both in person and virtually. In consideration of others and the business conducted tonight, please silence your cell phones and any electronic devices and refrain from speaking unless recognized. Again, this is a public meeting for the community of Glendora. We appreciate and respect your participation here this evening. Let's see, roll call. Madam Clerk, will you please conduct roll call?
Thank you, President. At this time, I will conduct an oral roll call and request that each trustee respond with present when their name is called. Trustee Chu? Present. Trustee Flowers?
Present.
Trustee Tolan?
Present.
Vice President Johnson?
Present.
President Lamnon?
Present.
Let the record show all trustees are present.
Vice President Johnson, would you be interested in doing the flag salute today?
It would be my honor.
Okay, thanks.
Flag, right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Vice President Johnson. Does anyone wish to reorder or add to the agenda? Okay. I'd like to open up public comment period. Is there anybody interested in speaking in the audience? There's like no audience members here, but just in case. Is there anybody online?
There is no one on Zoom.
So I guess I will close public comment. Does any trustee have any reports or announcements?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to remind the board and our library community that next week will begin the Holiday Baskets, our annual canned food and dry food donation drive. It will last until October the 27th, which is the final day of donation. I've coordinated with Cindy Romero, and I'll make sure she gets the list and coordinate and schedule the pickup times that we're going to do bi-weekly here at the library. This is the 67th year of the food drive campaign. And I'm happy to say and report that the Glendora Public Library is one of the strongest collection sites that we have here in our community, that we have to absolutely relieve them twice a week, or they're literally bursting at the seams with all the donations from our library patrons. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any comments or announcements? I would like to just add one thing. My favorite time of the year is coming up, and that's Banned Book Week. And I always have a great time talking about with my students, and they're always shocked about the different books that have been challenged that have come up, such as Captain Underpants. That Stephen King books, of course, but I love Stephen King books. But anyway, I just wanted to share that. So I hope everybody else, I almost wore my banned book t-shirt, but I did not. So, okay, thanks. Library Director Stone, would you like to make your report?
I would be happy to. Thank you very much. Good to see everyone. Next slide, please. We're going to start out this evening responding to some interest in what's been happening since we went overdue fee free as of July 1st. Just, it has been only a couple of months, so it's early days yet. We will certainly have more data as we move forward, but we're happy to share what's been happening over these few weeks so far. Next slide, please. So what we tried to do is but recall some of the questions we had about the service and approach the statistics that way. So one of the questions about going overdue fee free was, will people continue to bring their items back? And so at the beginning of July, for every 1,000 items in our collection, 5 of those were more than 28 days overdue. So basically 0.5%. The beginning of September, we took another snapshot, and for those same 1,000 items, 6 were more than 28 days overdue, or 0.6%. So I think so far we're seeing that people indeed are bringing their items back. Next slide, please. So another question very closely related is, will there still be enough to check out if there aren't any overdue fees? At the beginning of July, for every 10,000 items in the collection, 8,569 of them were available for checkout. At the beginning of September, it was 8,565. So again, we are not seeing any huge impact on the availability of materials to check out. Next slide, please. All right. Another excellent question people had is, will people still get the popular items as fast? Interestingly, we've seen this get faster. In April, May, and June, it was almost 14 days. In June, July, and August, it was closer to 12 in terms of the average time to fill the hold on popular materials. So we'll keep looking at this. We don't really know what all the factors are here yet. So we'll just keep tracking this and see if that's a sustained trend. But anyway, so far, not a thing to worry about. And finally, next slide, please. We were, hoping that this would encourage people to use the library's content. And indeed, we have seen, and again, we'll have to track this over time to see how much of this is seasonal or causal or at least correlative anyway. But at the beginning of July, just over 1,700 accounts had items checked out. At the beginning of September, it was over 2,000. So we would hope that might be a result, at least partially, of people not having overdue fees, but it's far too early to say. But at least it's trending in the direction we had hoped it would trend. So I just wanted to share those different statistics about the collection since we went overdue free. And before I mention anything else about the rest of the usual director's report, I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay.
Really quickly.
Mhm.
So how are we telling patrons when they check out the books with the staff member as opposed to the self-checkout? Do we tell them, oh, there's no overdue fines anymore?
So I'll actually have Donna address that. Donna is basically oversees the checkout desk.
Hi. So yes, we do. When a patron comes to check out and they have previous fines, overdue fines from before July 1st, those have all been waived now. But we do still have patrons that come up to us and want to pay, say, oh, I have these fines. I didn't realize, my books were late. And we do let them know. So, as much as we can, we do advertise it and we do share that with them. Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? And in addition.
I just also like to mention when materials are checked out, staff does indicate when the return date is every time materials are checked out with a staff person. So people are getting the information that here's when the books should be brought back by.
Thank you.
But we're not advertising that. There's just signs. Okay.
And
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the increase, it could be actually caused by this new, we're marketing this new policy, if the increase is due to that, or if just more patrons are coming to the library for other reasons.
Right. And, you know, with only that's about 8 weeks of
Yeah.
data. It's pretty hard to tell.
Yeah. Okay.
But like, you know, at least it's not dramatically going in a direction
Right,
that,
right,
you know,
right,
yeah,
right.
that's what we were most, you know, curious about.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. The standard report from the director and divisions is in the packet, which is available online to the entire public. And as usual, I won't be going over that detail by detail. We would be here until tomorrow if we did. I do have one update, which is that well, it's actually just a clarification. So the mobile shelving that the foundation was kind enough to sponsor, and that will give us a much more flexible main floor. That delivery is slated for the second half of October. It's already been postponed once, so that's what we hope. That's when we hope it will arrive. And I just wanted to let you know that we're in dialogue with the company and considering whether or not we may want to close briefly for the it's not really installation because it's mobile, but for the assembly and the positioning and the loading of those shelves. It may be a matter of, you know, 1 day of closure versus 3 days of disruption if we're open while it's all happening. And we don't know yet. We're still dialoguing with the company about that. We should know more after Elke returns later this week, and we'll be sure to keep you posted about what we decide. There is precedent for this kind of project for the staff, you know, authorizing a closure when we recarpeted some years ago, that kind of thing. So, but we'll certainly keep you posted of what we decide to do to keep things running as smoothly as possible. That's really the only other comment I have about that written report that's in your packet. But I'm happy to answer any questions should anybody have any. Thank you.
Thank you for that information, Director Stone. The next topic is special items. So it's the fiscal year 2022-2023 wrap-up budget. I'd like to invite Director Stone to present.
Thank you very much. A lot of this we would normally be asking Management Analyst Elke Cathell up to walk through with you. She's unable to be here this evening, so I will be trying to do her work some honor here. And just as a reminder, we did wrap up a fiscal year 23 from some other respects at the last meeting, but the budget we wait until we have the actual fiscal year completely closed out, and often that has happened not in August, but by September. So we're going to be going through some fiscal components of the last year's budget just to wrap it up for you. And then also some of the budget goals that were in the city's budget document, and just give you some highlights of how those ended up. So next slide, please. And next slide, please. So just want to give a blanket thank you to the Friends Foundation. They are present in a lot of what you're about to see. And for more information on specifically which kinds of things they help fund, if you look at the monthly director and division reports, we bullet all of those things where they have specifically contributed to. But anyway, just always want to say thank you to them for being such an additional presence in addition to the support that comes from the city, which we also appreciate greatly. So next slide, please. All right, this is the fiscal part. Next slide, please. And just a little bit of a reminder about the process of the 2-year budget, because basically this report closes out a 2-year budget. And the first site you saw of that was back in February of 2020, when you reviewed the fines and fees as usual. And this is a pretty typical pattern that we go through each year. In February, you reviewed the fines and fees, or the board at that time did. In May, the board received a budget review from the city manager and from me about the 2-year budget that was being proposed at that time. And then in June, the council approved that 2-year budget and included both of these fiscal and narrative components that we're going to be closing out today. Next slide, please. So again, like I said, it's a pretty typical thing. The second year in January of 2022, we did a mid-year report for you about the budget that was already underway. And then we also, the board prepared for the next year of the budget, its fines and fees review. And typical again, in May, the city manager came back and we did another sort of year's look forward at the next part of the budget. And then in June, once again, they adopted the mid-cycle budget, meaning they adopted the second year of the 2 years. And in that case, really what they were doing was really just looking at the fiscal components. They didn't really address the narrative part again at that point. Next slide, please. And then in January of this year, as usual, you received a mid-year review and also reviewed the fines and fees, again, moving forward. And one additional thing this time was that in April of 2023, the City Council adopted a 2-year strategic plan for the city, a new one. And so because that happened before we really closed out this 2-year budget and this year that we are reporting on, I just wanted to mention that because it does impact some of the budget goals and things that we would like to just highlight for you tonight. All right, next slide, please. So just a few things of note, and when you look at the budget details that are in the packet available to the public, first of all, there's a range of accounts that are basically reflect full and part-time vacancies. So when you see that those are what could be considered underspent, I suppose, it's because we didn't have those positions filled. Also, just a reminder that we do recommend staffing levels, but beyond that, we are not really in control of the costs of those things. So many of those line items that you see, like the vehicle allowance, the benefits, the workers' comp, and so on, we recommend the staffing that those represent, but we don't control those item by item. Along the staffing lines, you'll see a line in there about temporary contract staff, and those were charged to both support services and adult services this time around because they were assisting in both of those areas of the library. Next slide, please. Okay, so just some other things of note. And you'll see some themes running through this. So we went slightly over budget in one place for office supplies. Interestingly enough, I'm sure many of us are familiar with this because of the cost of ink and toner cartridges. Building materials, you'll see it was the other way. Again, if you want to call it underspent, the impact on that included several things that were sort of thematic through the year. We're still seeing, of course, some reduced traffic since pre-COVID times. We building materials in some ways, the things that are included in that account are impacted by our vacancies. We have been using existing supplies that we already have. And in some cases, we're kind of in a holding pattern because we're waiting for the news about the future evolution of the building. And there's some things we really don't want to invest in at this point until we know a little bit more about where we're going. Next slide, please. Postage, we have reduced our mailings because we are more reliant on electronic communication these days, but also because of our staffing levels during this budget year, we did temporarily revise our interlibrary loan procedures, which used to involve a lot of actual surface mail. And because of the new ways we are approaching that, you'll see that postage element was not spent out. You'll see a line in there about bank service charges. Those reflect our pending but not yet available implementation of e-commerce. And then under training and education, that was impacted by those staff vacancies because when we don't have people, we can't train the people. So you'll see that reflected there. Utilities, this is another one I'm guessing we're all familiar with. There are just, increased costs, and we do usually recommend to the city or point them out at mid-year, and it's their choice as to how they decide to account for that. Contract services. So some of those things we originally budgeted for, but it turned out that the state library had a variety of initiatives that helped complement or in some cases replace our actual investment in especially things like some of our online services. So we didn't end up needing to spend that money. And we are always very conscious of making sure that we can demonstrate a need for adding anything. Just because we have the money doesn't mean we will go and spend it unless we have a demonstrated need for a new service. Also because we want to be aware of the sustainability of doing that with funds that we might have for a year, because the state library does something. We don't want to introduce a service that will be challenging to maintain. But the main thing is that we're just very conscientious about making sure we can demonstrate that the need is there. All right. Let's see here. Again, you've seen the reduced traffic comment before that affect our division supplies. The Fund 229, among other things, represents the grants of the Library Foundation. And one of the big elements there is this over $100,000 that was encumbered for our mobile shelving. And then there are trust fund accounts that reflect donations that have been made to the library specifically rather than to the Friends Foundation, which does occasionally happen every once in a while. All right. So I'll just take a pause there, even though I don't have a questions slide at this moment, but I can still ask if there are any questions before I continue.
Does the trust fund money have specific destinations based on the donor's requests?
Sometimes, but not always. So there are different parts of it that have where we've been asked, that it be spent in only in certain kinds of ways, but some of it is completely unconditional. So it just varies depending on the donation.
I see. So what's the process like in terms of like when you choose to use that money? If there's no instructions on what to use it
Right.
for.
So that is actually at library discretion.
Mhm.
And we have, because of the pending decisions about the building that are coming, we have decided to keep the majority of that to see if there are ways that we can boost the impact and effectiveness of what might be coming. For example, if we are going to be closed for say 6 to 9 months for an $8 million, maintenance and mechanical and engineering sort of process on the library, and if that means we have to completely move out, there may be some great opportunities for what to do to the vacated main floor. And although the city did not budget for those things, we have some of this money, and we may be able to work with the city and the foundation on doing some things to the main floor that will make it much more robust service area when we move back in, even though even if it weren't in that scenario, an actual remodel. So in the moment we're not, it's not really a rainy day, but we're setting it aside until we have a better idea of what the building needs. But it's basically at our discretion within those instructions we've been given with each one. It's at the library's discretion to spend.
Got it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Okay, so this slide, we did close out the year, so I wanted to make sure we also just sort of did this final piece about the 50th at 140 South celebration. Just a reminder to the rest of the community that that was a celebration of our location at 140 South Glendora Avenue, and the building was opened in 1972. So we had a year-long set of festivities, and the library board, thank you so much for your support. The Friends Foundation very generously granted funds for us to be able to create this year-long celebration, which challengingly enough bridged 2 fiscal years. So this is a little bit of a different kind of table. It basically, we did a behind the scenes thing to try and show you overall between the 2 fiscal years and between the 2 grant processes that this represented for the Friends Foundation, what the total cost estimates we had between the 2, and then what we ended up expending. And I would say, since we know we had such a great impact on the plaza at that event in February, and then a really wonderful impact at Movies in the Park. I mean, we were a bargain. I mean, we came out at under $8,000 when we were estimating almost 20,000. So thank you to all of you for your parts in that. All right. So moving on from the fiscal parts of the budget, the city's budget does have this narrative component, which does not get as thoroughly updated as often, but we want to make sure we circle back around and make sure we sort of give some highlights of how we progressed over the last year of this 2-year budget. Next slide, please. So these that you'll see in the written report that's in your packet are the goals that were listed in that adopted budget when it was adopted for those 2 years. Like I said, in between those 2 years, they update the budget numbers, but we don't do a lot with the narrative that's produced at the beginning of that 2-year period. There are many overlaps here with our strategic framework, which we report to you very often about. And many of these also reflect the goals intentionally. The city manager this is part of his philosophy. They reflect the goals in the prior 3-year strategic plan, as well as some of them have been carried over into that new 2-year citywide strategic plan that I mentioned was adopted in April. So there's just lots of components to this, and many of them will look familiar. So here are a few things of note about that. Again, I won't go through it item by item, but just a few things of note. First of all, the library classification and compensation review. We are anticipating getting our job descriptions and our job title sort of full proposal back from them in October. We've seen some samples, we provided some feedback, and now October is when we're expecting to see the first sort of full proposal of all of that. So that's very exciting. There is this city communication strategic plan where we had offered some support for that. That, as you have heard verbally before, is currently under review by the city, and their approach to that is sort of being reconsidered and refreshed. There is a city facilities condition assessment. That contract was, and so this is a little bit of a sneak in here because it was actually awarded after the end of the fiscal year, but I just thought you might want to know how it's progressing as it shows up in the city documents. So they did actually award a contract for this city's facilities condition assessment just this August. And basically what it will do, it will provide a current physical condition of each building, system, or asset, and in accordance with a certain rating scale. So each one will kind of get a rating in terms of its physical condition. And then it will also provide the basis for a capital plan report reflecting 5, 10, and 20-year horizons. So the library will be included in that. And some of those steps have just been taken. It's been showing up for a while in the city's documentation, but some of those steps were just taken. And I wanted to make sure you knew because we'll be part of that. The library building, of course, has been getting a lot of independent attention, and the structural analysis, the contract was awarded in January of 2023. You participated in, small teams in that visioning part that was part of phase 2 of that assessment. And we have now received drafts of both phase 1 and phase 2. The library and public works have made all of their comments and responses to that. And so that is now in the hands of MHP, the consultant, and they are reviewing our comments and will be incorporating them so that those 2 phases can be brought back as a whole package. And then that can go sort of through final review with the city before it is made public and presented wherever in all the places it will be presented. So that's it's moving along really well. Also, there is a new strategic plan objective for the library in that new 2-year plan that was created in April. So I just wanted to point this one out. The way it's phrased is that basically in order to support our connections to information and other human services and to guide our partnerships and service development. The city has on its strategic plan supporting this library and partner conducted surveys. And there are a couple of tasks in there that that involve trying to figure out how was actually basically one about how to identify which kinds of surveys and engagement should be happening ongoing and which ones would be sort of case by case related to certain topics that we want to find out from the community. So so that's just beginning to get underway. But I love the fact that it's represented in the citywide strategic plan, that support of our continual community engagement. Okay, let's see a few other things of note in the budget narrative. I've already mentioned that the mobile shelving is scheduled for October. In terms of social connections and exploring the world of ideas, you've heard a little bit about the Teen Idea Lab, and we will be having that team actually come to a future meeting and share more directly with you about the exciting stuff that teen venture is doing. We did introduce a sensory sensitive story time to see how that would work out. And while it was running, we did in fiscal year 2023, we did have over 460 participants in that. And also, of course, we've talked about the wonderful thing for preserving and making local history resources accessible is our community archive. So those are really the highlights from the goals as they were presented in the budget. Again, we approach our goals and our service responses through a variety of different documents, and there's just a lot of different dimensions, perspectives. That's just one of them. We wanted to make sure we kind of closed that out for you at the end of that 2-year budget. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
I just have a question. The temporary in lieu of permanent,
Yes.
that's implying employees, right?
That's contract staff. When we have vacancies, we often contract with library specific service agencies who send people to help fill those gaps while we're recruiting.
Do you ever get any of the temporary people as full-time, or do
Well,
they usually just fill in and they move on?
usually they just fill in and move on. Yeah.
How long of a time period usually do they fill in for? Is it like a couple months, or is
It has
longer?
varied pretty widely. Sometimes it's pretty short. The longest one, Cindy's signaling me, the longest one was for a couple of years. Was here for a couple of years. Now that may not always be associated with a single vacancy, right? So
I see.
sometimes the vacancies change
Okay.
and that person stays because, so Cindy, yeah, as she's pointed out, that was, during COVID. So
Makes sense.
anyway, thank you. Good question. Any other questions?
Is there a reason why we don't hire temp people and turn them into full-time? If there's, let's say we are taking a bit of time to find candidates for a position.
So there are several things going on there. One of them is that there are parts of the agreement with temporary agencies, not just this one, that if you hire away from them, if you hire their staff, you pay for that.
Okay.
Right. So that is one of the big ones. We have and it is up to those folks. If we have a competitive recruitment, they're welcome to apply. I'm not sure we don't have a philosophy about how we would work that out if they were coming and what that would do, but in terms of us specifically reaching out and hiring them away, they're already on the payroll somewhere else.
I see.
It's not,
Got it.
we don't have a temporary pool that then we can just make permanent.
Mhm.
It's they belong to another agency.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that's clear. Thank
Okay.
you.
Any questions?
No more questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. The next topic is the consent calendar. Items on the consent calendar will be enacted by one motion without individual discussion unless a board member has requested it be removed for separate discussion. Does anyone wish to pull or comment on any consent calendar item? Yes.
Madam President, just for clarification, I see that item number 4 on the consent calendar is the minutes for the August meeting, of which I did not attend. I would need to vote abstention for that. So should we pull that for a separate vote from the remaining items on the consent calendar?
I think we should let the city clerk's team address that.
So you said for item 4 regarding the minutes,
Yes, ma'am.
did the minutes show that you were present?
No, since I was not present, I would need to abstain on that particular item.
Okay,
So we need to pull that so I can abstain there and then take items 5 through 7 as one bulk. Is that correct?
okay, yes.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
we
you.
can go ahead and do that. So for this motion, it will be for items 5 through 7. Actually, we can do for item 4. So Flowers is gonna abstain himself from that one, and then we'll do another one for the 5 through 7. Or I can just make a note of that you're abstaining for item 4, and then for the other ones, it's 5 through 7.
Whichever you advise.
That sounds good.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. So I will have opened it up. If I can get a motion. So we have trustee Chu and then trustee Toland, and now we will now conduct oral roll call. Trustee Chu,
Aye.
trustee Flowers.
Aye.
Trustee Toland,
Aye.
Vice President Johnson,
Aye.
President Landman.
Aye.
Let the record show for item 4. We have 4-0, motion carries with 1 abstained. And then for items 5 through 7, we have motion passed, motion carried 5-0.
I'm sorry, on my screen, it's showing 0 aye and 5 abstain. I don't know what
Okay, so let
is
me
is
fix
is
that
that the
one.
same with everybody else? Okay.
And then, good.
No, it's still showing the same thing.
Oh, now it shows 4. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. Of course.
Then do we need to make a motion for the other items? Or was it all finalized? Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so this is cancellation of regular Board of Trustee Library. Regular Board of Library Trustee meetings for the 2023 holiday season. I'd like to invite Director Stone to present.
Thank you very much. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a little bit of review here. Our bylaws state, among other things, our bylaws are one of the things that state that the Board of Library Trustees meets monthly. By default. Historically, the board has reviewed the holiday schedule to consider canceling any meetings that might be affected by holiday activities and scheduling. In 2022, the trustees did indeed cancel the December 2022 meeting. And also that year, the city council took action so that their second November and 2nd December meetings, because they meet twice a month, they have decided those will no longer be held on an annual basis. So that has happened since we last considered this sort of thing. So I just wanted to share the city's larger environment about that. So here's a list of how the dates work this year. If we kept with the normal library trustees meeting in November, it would be November 20th. And then Thanksgiving and the day after would be the 23rd and 24th. And then in December, the meeting would be on the 18th, and Christmas Eve and the day and Christmas Day, because of the way they fall over the weekend, would be observed on the 25th and 26th. So that's how it times out. Just so you know, the December meetings have been canceled each year since 2015. The November meeting, in case you are curious about that, is typically a light agenda. And the Board of Library Trustees does have the ability to call a special meeting should any emergency topics arise. So that's sort of the environment in which you're considering all of this. Next slide, please. So basically, our recommendation for the evening is simply to discuss this, review it, and provide us direction on whether either of these meetings should be canceled, and we'll take care of it. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Would anyone have any question or want to discuss anything?
I'd be okay with canceling both November and December. They put a lot of work into these packets and, I'd be okay with canceling both.
Anybody else have anything to add? Okay, thank you. So let's see. I would like to request a motion for the cancellation of the November and December regular Board of Library Trustees meetings for the 2023 holiday season.
So I have a motion from trustee Toland. Waiting for a second. And we have a second from Vice President Johnson. I will now conduct an oral roll call. Trustee Chu?
Aye.
Trustee Flowers?
Aye.
Trustee Toland?
Aye.
Vice President Johnson?
Aye.
President Landman?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0.
Let's see, options for the next strategic visioning session. I'd like to invite Director Stone to report. You've
Thank
been
you.
busy.
You're probably missing Elke right about now, since you would have been hearing her voice for a while, usually this time. Okay, so next slide, please. Just a little bit of the history and the background here, because there is this goal, this support for the strategic plan, our strategic framework, and this desire to have meetings that are focused on that, in addition to the regular business meetings that we have. So just a little bit of background on what's been happening in that realm the last few years. We did have a special public meeting in 2021 to review the strategic plan. And that same year is when the comprehensive structural evaluation for the building was recommended, which of course sort of just changed a lot of what was on the horizon for us. And also in 2021, both City Council and the trustees received briefings about the building. So kind of a lot of the visioning work of the library turned in that year from the regular sort of strategic planning meetings to this, the structural evaluation. Then in 2022, there were further briefings about the facilities. And in 2023, the contract for that in-depth structural analysis was awarded. And of course, as we already mentioned, there was a lot of visioning meetings that went with the conducting of that analysis. Council was briefed in May, and they directed the staff to submit an $8 million repair project for a grant program for the state. And then there are, of course, the trustees' ongoing documents that support the strategic visioning that happen all the time. Next slide, please. Okay, so the grant award announcement is expected at the end of September, and the draft. So an update since this slide was prepared is that the in-depth structural analysis, as I mentioned, we have finished our internal review of that draft and have sent it back to that consultant. So I would expect there might be a little bit more back and forth, but we're working toward getting that finalized. So that's also in the offing. And those two things I think are going to impact exactly how we move forward with the next opportunity to discuss the framework, because we don't, it seems a little bit either redundant or preliminary to have a meeting about the strategic framework without knowing the results of that. So knowing that the city, not just us, but the city is also looking at how to best navigate as those things unfold. And they together, I and the city are exploring a possible joint meeting for the trustees and the council. And some of the things we have to factor in as we do that are how to do that with the Brown Act, what the usual closed session mandates are for what would determine if we did it under closed session, where we would want to do that. There's some indication that perhaps we would want to do that at the library, because that's where the issues are. And then also, of course, finally, when we get around to distilling all that down, then just actually figuring out the schedules of the council and the board. So I know I don't have here's the plan, here's some proposed dates, here's what the meeting's going to look like, because that's what we are navigating. But I wanted to pull it sort of out of the usual reporting structure and make sure I just checked in with you and let you know that it's we are not sort of ignoring that wonderful support and interest you have in the strategic framework, but we want to make sure we're using that time, especially if we're spending it with council, that we're using it in an effective way. So I don't have a timeline, but I would expect once these reports start coming back, that this is going to move pretty quickly in the next, say, 4 to 8 weeks. Not necessarily that we would have it scheduled, but that you would start seeing actual calendaring happening within that time. That's just a guess. We'll hope we actually do hear about the grant and, all of that stuff on the timeline we're expecting. So I'm happy to answer any questions. And it's here for you to discuss if you should. I mean, it's on the agenda, so you're welcome to discuss it as well if you would like.
Did anybody want to make any comments or have any questions?
Thank you. Director Stone, based on your report just now, it seems uncommon that you would have a joint meeting of council and the board of directors if we're still trying to navigate how that is to be conducted. Is that correct?
So actually, I think it was probably, I don't think we've addressed this since COVID, but it was a pretty regular thing that the library board would be part of a city council meeting each year. That was a fairly routine thing. It was part of the public meeting here in chambers. There was often a report prepared of varying kinds. Lately, it had been a video report prepared by staff with the board's input to present to council, and then it was opened up for any topics of conversation. So some of the challenges now are the considerations of closed session guidelines. As you know, we have reported out from closed sessions about the threat to public facilities, that some of the structural anomalies have presented that. And then also it's a different challenge if we do want to meet in the public parts of the library, when to do that, when the library is in public service or not, and how to schedule that. And that becomes a different thing from saying, okay, on a regular Tuesday night, we all just show up an hour earlier and do it. Here's part of council. So that's why it's different. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
Thank you, Director Stone.
Okay.
So are we receiving and filing or making a motion to receive and file?
That would be the motion for the evening. Yes,
Okay.
but you're welcome. I mean, you're welcome to discuss. And I mean, that's just our recommended motion.
So we are expecting to hear the results in September
Of the grant.
Of the grant.
Mhm.
So do we table this discussion until we hear back and then see if it's needed to schedule anything?
Ah, I see. So I think because it's in this the support for doing a discussion, whether or not it involves councils officially, to do some kind of discussion about the strategic framework, not just a report out, not just a report out like we do every few months, but an actual dedicated session to that. There's support for that. So I think we'll be returning to that idea sort of regardless of what happens. The thing I just wanted to detail a little bit more is that I think it's best to wait on trying to schedule one of those, because there is a bit of production to that in terms of what gets presented from staff, how we conduct that discussion, where it happens, what time, because that would always be a separate special meeting. And if we're going to go through all of that, that we want to make sure it addresses the things that are most need to be addressed right now. And we won't really know that until we get that grant. But even if somehow something completely crystal and transparent happens when the grant results come back, if that happens in the world, then I think we would still want to circle back around and have a discussion about our own strategic planning discussion. So it won't be off the table. It'll just be different at that time.
Okay.
Is the grant all or nothing? Is it $8 million or nothing, or could we be granted some portion of that?
Actually, so there are matching funds involved. So the grant itself is not $8 million that we've applied for. I mean, there are different grant amounts. We did not apply for a full 8 because they're matching grants. The project is up to $8 million as a whole, including the matching funds that we would have to provide, or may be required from the state to provide. And it is possible that we would get no money. It's possible that we would get only part of what we asked for. So, and I should say Public Works. I mean, it was a group effort, but Public Works really was this, was the moving force behind that grant. So we really, it's a interesting wait. We don't really know what that's going to be like. And there will still be, even if there's enough money on the state side to fulfill from that end, the $8 million project, there would still be some other actions required for those matching funds and everything. The city would still have some actions to take and some decisions to make, even just for that $8 million project, right?
Okay.
So there will still be discussions, even if it comes back exactly as we applied for the grant. And then if it doesn't come back exactly that way, for sure we'll be, having to start from scratch. Thank you.
And since we canceled the meeting for November and December, what if we hear something? Would we just make a special added meeting for either November or December, or would there be a preference?
Oh, I would expect that it won't be necessarily attached to the same timing as usual, that we would be reaching out on a different schedule. I mean, might coincidentally fall at the same time that a normal library board meeting would be, but I don't think there's going to be any correlation necessarily to it replacing a November or December meeting. It would be a completely different scheduling concern. If I'm understanding your question.
Yeah, I was just, primarily I was curious if it would be recommended to do it after the holidays or if during the holiday season. That's what I was just asking, in case anybody in the public was interested in participating.
Yeah. And again, we don't know what kind of meeting it's going to be, right? We don't know yet. So, we'll know much more about that approach once we start getting the results back from the grant and some other considerations, some of which I mentioned earlier this evening. And then we'll be able to sort out what kind of meeting, if it's going to be a workshop, if it's going to be, a closed session, which would be under the certain restrictions as provided by law, or what we would be doing. So we don't know any of that yet.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Anybody else have any questions or? Okay. Okay. So like to request a motion to receive and file the next strategic visioning session.
We have a motion from Flowers and second by President Landman. Okay, I'll now conduct oral roll call. Trustee Chu? Aye. Trustee Flowers?
Aye.
Trustee Tolan?
Aye.
Vice President Johnson?
Aye.
President Landman?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0.
Do any trustees or staff have any additional questions or closing comments?
I have one comment. Just briefly reviewing the budget. This library is always so mindful of costs, right? And the fact that some of the spending wasn't done because of the lack of personnel just means your staff is doing more with less, right? And so that is recognized and very much appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you for that. We really appreciate that.
Okay. Oh, yes.
Sorry, before we close out, I just wanted to announce that tomorrow evening, September 19th, is the 16th annual Battle of the Books. We have 11 teams set and ready to compete. It's 6 o'clock in Bidwell Forum, and it will also be streamed live on the city's YouTube channel. So hopefully we'll see some of you either in person or online.
And my usual pitch, if I may, is that you do not have to have read the books for it to
No.
be totally fun.
Yes.
It is really a grand time watching these kids and their amazing expertise with these books.
Having
It's-
never not read the books, I can't make that pitch.
I can.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, thank you so much. Okay, then I would like to adjourn the meeting at 7:56.